Okay, Tim. Todd here again. Some guitar guy. First off, and as always, thanks for watching. So, I do apologize for the delay in getting this video up. Today, I want to talk about the Richard McSpadden Russ Francis crash, specifically the NTSB's release of their preliminary findings. So today is November the 15th. Crash happened back October the 1st. And really, this is kind of old news by now. The report has been out for, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks or so now. But with my crazy work schedule, this is the first opportunity I had. I do have a flight planned this afternoon, just a quick round robin and a day off. So, yeah, I wanted to go ahead and do that and go over the preliminary findings. I apologize for the length. I just cannot cover this in a 10-minute video. It's too much. So relax or pause or whatever. Find a 10-minute video. But yeah, it is going to be a little bit longer and a little bit more in depth. And from my perspective, I'm not. I mean, these guys were super experienced pilots. So who am I? I'm a low time former rusty pilot, but just to give my thoughts and try to learn what I can from the crash, and maybe in doing that help others learn. But anyway, just a couple of quick refresher picks borrowed from local media the day of the crash. And there was a lot of bad information floating around, and still is on the internet and YouTube. But we as aviators, and I think just the human race, lost a lot that day. And then kind of keep this in mind. I can't get this perspective or this camera angle from a flight planner. I can't rotate it, but to give a little bit of a view they would have seen. Now this is higher than they would have been, and not, it's kind of looking down a little bit, not looking out, and certainly not looking out the through the windshield of the airplane. But that's the kind of the setting or the backdrop. So let's kind of jump into this report. Here it is. Here's the accident number. You can certainly download this yourself. You'll need this number. Go to this site and scroll down to the NTSB status section, paste, and you see that pre-populates because I've done that and read it in detail, and then submit. And yes, you have your own copy. So here it is, the preliminary report. It gives the date and time specifics, how the airplane was operated, the model, tail number. And then the first thing here that jumped out, yeah, they did confirm a previous video I did that they took off from runway 32, not 14. And the crash itself happened on the runway 14 end of the runway. So they kind of feel a little vindicated there. There's a lot of information on YouTube that it was the opposite, that they took off runway 14 and crashed on the runway 32 end. And then the plan, and had read this, the pilot owner, Francis, was to take off and climb out until they got into formation, and then the pilot rated passenger, McSpadden, would take over as they did the photo shoot. So I get to this paragraph, and I mean, my eyes widened and jaw dropped a little bit. I don't really have an explanation for this, but during the taxi out, witnesses, plural, heard the engine of the accident airplane running when the Beech pulled up next to it. Then the accident airplane's engine shut off, and about 10 seconds later, the engine restarted. So again, the questions that we didn't know that before. So during that 10 seconds, did Francis just wait and then it started right back up fine, or was he grinding on the starter for 10 seconds, or did he maybe make one other attempt? We don't know. We just know it shut off, apparently completely unexpectedly. Now, another explanation here is the Beech pulled up, and for whatever reason, he shut the engine off. That's completely plausible. They're getting ready to take off. I would say that would be unlikely, unless the Beech also shut her engine off. But and that is a little bit more suspect. We'll get to this in a second, but let me scroll down. Where is that? Yeah, no. And of course, now I can't find it. Here. This was a very low time engine, not even 37 hours of operation. And I did look on FlightAware. The airplane has not been flown that much this year. And couple that with a not even broken in engine yet. I think the standard's probably somewhere around 100 hours for break-in period. And it just shuts off on its own. If that's what happened, yeah. To me, the obvious answer is turn it around, taxi back to the ramp. I don't know what kind of facilities Lake Placid offers, and this being on a Sunday, maybe they had zero staff there to look at the plane. But there's the human factor comes in already, that this was a photo shoot. There were two planes involved. Several pilots, there's cost to all that. This had probably been planned probably for months. And, not only from the AOPA side wanting to get that photo shoot, but also I'm sure Francis figured that would be a boost to his, to his business. But the human factors already, it started back up, and probably the thinking in their defense was, well, we'll do a full run up and really keep a close eye on the gauges and everything, and if everything checks out, then we'll go from there. We can always abort the takeoff. So probably not as oh my god as it might sound, but that's still a big red flag. Especially considering the low time on the engine and the fact the plane hadn't been flown very much at all this year. So moving forward in the report, so during the takeoff roll, a witness described the engine sounded as if the prop was set for climb and not takeoff. Then he heard the engine surge. Now, we don't need to know really who this person is, but where they were. Right? Assuming they're on the ramp somewhere, standing outside, just kind of watching the two birds take off. And I think probably what he meant was cruise and not take off, but that was quoted. So I don't know, maybe what he was trying to say. And I think that's clear in the second sentence. During the initial climb, the witness further described the engine did not sound as if it was running at full power. And I think that's his whole point. So maybe a mistake or something. He meant to say something else, but that's what he was trying to say. The accident airplane then made a gentle left turn while it was 300 to 400 feet above ground level to join with the Beech. As the accident airplane closed to within about 1,000 feet of the Beech, it suddenly made a hard right turn back toward the departure airport. During the turn, the Beech pilot, now we do know what witness and where they were, heard the accident airplane, the passenger, McSpadden, transmit on the CTAF, "We have a problem, we're returning to the airport." And the next paragraph, "They almost made it 15 feet below the top of the plateau." Now, they wouldn't have made it exactly to the runway, but they would have been on basically level ground, and almost assuredly a much different outcome. Steep embankment, I think it was 70-degree embankment. They did level the plane with the embankment, or pretty much. The right wing struck, it slid down. Then they give some airport information: 1,747 feet field elevation. So, add 300 or 400 feet to that for their altitude. Almost 4,200 foot field, 60 feet wide. 3.5 degree glide path. I thought that was interesting, where the standard, if you will, is maybe 3 degrees. And then the weather, which amazingly, with all the internet and YouTube coverage of this, no one's mentioned the weather or the density altitude, and they don't bother to go in and I'm sure they calculated it. They just don't mention it here, and I calculated it. Based on, actually, I found another site that gives a little bit more. That's not at the Adirondack Regional. It's actually for Lake Placid. Density altitude would have been a factor, and even more of a factor if the engine is not at 100%, but it's not extreme. So I think it added maybe 1,100 feet or so to their altitude. So instead of 17, maybe they're 27, 28, maybe 2,900 feet. But I mean, the engine's already struggling, so that's more of a factor than it would have been, say, for a healthy airplane. Then it goes to talk about Francis and his experience. And like I said, you really couldn't have asked for more experience and training in that airplane. 9,000 hours total as of first part of the year on his second class medical, commercial rated, private pilot on a rotorcraft, and type rated on a DC-3. I mean, how cool is that? They don't give McSpadden's information. I did look it up on the FAA site. Excuse me. I have read he had about 5,000 hours total time, type rated on a citation, rated on land and sea. I think even maybe multi-sea seaplane. So I mean, you had tons and tons of experience here. We already covered the engines, the engine, control cable continuity. The flaps were extended at 10 degrees. Stabilator trim was neutral. All right, that, along with, and they get to the landing gear down here, would have been indicative of setting up for landing. Although Cessna does recommend for this bird to use 10 degrees of flaps on takeoff. Now, they probably didn't keep the flaps extended after takeoff. Don't know if they used flaps for takeoff, but Cessna does recommend that on these Cardinals. They weren't the best climbers, nor were they the best gliders. They were built more for cruise speed, and they are, especially the RGs. They are fast little birds, much faster than, say, 172. Fuel strainer, all that to say, there was no water contamination, and the the fuel selector was to both, as it would have been for landing, and then they get into the nose gear or the landing gear. The nose gear was crushed aft. The main gear was intermediate and was in contact with the buckled lower fuselage and not in the wheel well. So they were in process, it seems to be, with flaps, the stabilator trim, and the gear trying to come down. Make sure I didn't miss anything. They talk about the engine. They use a bore scope, pull out some of the plugs. They note nothing, no abnormalities within the cylinders. But then here, top of the 4th page, they eventually pull out all 8 spark plugs and compare them, and that sentence coloration across the plugs was from normal to black carbon fouled with normal wear on the electrodes. That really raises a lot of questions. So all we know from that sentence is that at least one of the plugs was normal and at least one of the plugs was black carbon fouled. What the combination, however many numerical combinations you can make, we don't know. And even one plug being carbon fouled is going to deteriorate the performance, or could at least the performance of that engine. The mag had spark at all ignition leads. Nothing wrong there. The oil, the fuel system. I think I missed this. They did find the throttle was out about 2 inches. Oh, here, yeah. Mixture control is full rich. Prop control is in the high RPM setting, and the throttle was out about 2 inches. So again, more with the landing configuration. Sorry, I missed that. Back to the plugs in the condition. Now, this engine in the RG was fuel injected, and I'm certainly no expert in engines, let alone fuel injected airplane engines, and still not even really sure what a fuel servo is. But it was found attached to the lower side of the engine with all lines tight secure. But, and that is a big but, in my opinion, all 4 hold down nuts were found loose when slight pressure with a wrench was applied. So tighter than finger tight. They actually had to put a wrench on the nut, but it moved very easily with slight pressure. Torque stripes were present on the studs and nuts. The torque stripes do not appear to be disturbed or misaligned. So every fastener, if you don't know, so nut and a bolt, nut and a stud, has a torque spec. But these torque stripes are the paint that you may have seen under the hood of your car to indicate that that fastener has been torqued to the spec, to the whatever the spec is, and then the little stripe of paint goes across both the nut and the stud to further indicate that, and to indicate if anything's been monkeyed with, I guess is a way to describe that. So the torque stripes were there and didn't appear to be disturbed yet, and it doesn't give the torque spec, and I haven't looked that up, but it's almost assuredly tighter than slight pressure. There really wouldn't be a need for a torque stripe for 2 foot-pounds of torque. And don't know if this is related to the carbon fouling on the plugs. Maybe. Don't know, but that's definitely something to look at later on. Throttle plate was closed and apparently not attached to the throttle cable. The throttle moved freely when moved by hand, but, and then, another but here, the thread rod for the idle thumb screw adjustment was found fractured, not connected. Now that could have been, and probably likely, from the impact. So they go on and say the wreckage is retained and give some more information on the weather and so on and so forth. Now keep in mind, this weather was at Adirondack Regional, and let's kind of go to, which is here, about 13 miles to the northwest from Lake Placid. Lake Placid actually does not have ASOS or AWOS on the field. And I guess the first time I looked this airport up, I noticed this. It's kind of obvious. It's in the bottom of this big bowl surrounded by the Adirondack Mountains, right? So the wind, I'm sure, which is why the runway is aligned this way, the wind was from the north. I believe it's 7 knots, so straight down, but I'm sure it would have to funnel through this mountain pass right to the runway. So even though the weather at Adirondack was from the north, or the wind, then they probably did take off into a pretty near direct headwind. Why is that important? I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe it means a lot. So let's go to, not that. Let's go to the satellite view of the airport. And there's been a lot of speculation of, the initial reports were that they crashed on this end. And why didn't they go here? Why didn't they go, to one of these golf courses, and blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't crash down there. It's the reason they didn't go there. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's not the way it happened. So they took off this direction, okay, to the northwest toward Adirondack Regional and the town of Lake Placid. Now, and another one of the first things I noticed, and that's not addressed at all in the preliminary report, is this field. It's almost 4,200 feet, but it has a displaced threshold. This entire area is not considered usable runway, and that's probably about 1,000 feet. At one time, I'm sure it was a 5,000 foot strip, but for whatever reason, that is now not usable runway. So what does that mean? Well, if you're going to take off from here, here's your taxiway. Can I go down and see this? I think this is sourced from Google. You have to back taxi, right? And either turn around if you can get the plane turned around, or you have to continue all the way down here, turn around and come back. We don't know whether they, that would have been best practice, but we don't know that they didn't use a rolling start from, and that's actually, well, there's your whole short line, that they didn't, just turn left onto the runway, a rolling start, short themselves by about 1,000 feet and take off. Don't know. Why does that matter? Well, maybe it doesn't. But that's, if you take off from here, say, opposed to here, that's going to put you roughly 1,000 feet further away from the airport. Could that have made a difference? Well, back to 15 feet. Yeah, I think it could have, but they may very well have. And having said that being best practice, I think it's a little more likely they would have back taxied and used the entire strip than shorted themselves a little bit. But of course, the only indication they had at the time, Francis would have known it was a low time engine. McSpadden probably would have known. They knew the engine shut off. Presumably they did a full run up and everything was up to snuff. So that's really the only indication. So if they did kind of make a short field takeoff, I don't. That wouldn't be like an oh my god, I can't believe they did that type thing. But it is going to put them 1,000 feet further away from the field. Now, hindsight, knowing there was an engine problem, then yeah. What can you learn? What can I learn is use all the runway available. If it means it takes you another couple of minutes to back taxi and turn around, and maybe somebody you hear is maybe 10 miles out is going to have to wait a minute for you to get lined up and turned around, then they'll just have to wait. I mean, that's part of flying, and patience and professionalism and safety and all that. But anyway, kind of digressing. So we know they took off this direction, and when they got to 300 to 400 feet, they started a left gentle bank to join up with the beach. Problem is, we don't know exactly where they were when they started that bank and or got to that altitude. Now, I have simmed this with the plane at gross max under those weather conditions. I can't really, with any accuracy, simulate, because we don't know. Was the engine making 75% power, 63% power? So that's really as close as I could come, was just simulate max gross, and assuming they took off from the actual threshold. 300 to 400 feet was probably, it's going to, straight along the runway, it's going to be over the subdivision. Now, maybe it's a little closer to the runway, maybe it's a little further away, but it's somewhere over the subdivision. And then with the gentle left turn, again, we don't know how long they held that turn. But so maybe that puts them around this roadway in, maybe the courtyard, maybe closer. And I don't know, your variance could be, I don't know, a half mile, maybe even a mile. So somewhere maybe centered over, just for argument's sake, either the roadway in or the Cascade Acres. But we don't know how far they carried that. Then they made the call, we have a problem, we're returning to the airport. So I don't want to get too far away. So the wind was reported from the north, but more, I'm guessing it's probably more straight down the runway because of the mountain pass. Turning right, say from this area or this area, if the wind was coming basically from the north, would make sense, because you're turning into the wind, right? You're struggling to gain altitude, turn into the wind. That would have been instinctive for both these guys. But, and just kind of for argument's sake, if they're out in this area to turn hard right, flying basically, the perimeter of this subdivision, hard right, coming back in. This is actually the berm they struck, probably in this area. But flying that question mark shaped course to get back to the runway, that's a fair amount of distance. Now, when they turned into the wind, if they had turned or made their gentle turn to the right instead of the left, then yes, this golf course would have absolutely been in play. But they didn't. They turned left and don't know how far away they got. And my first two reactions were, if I'm somewhere here, somewhere around this area, I have this, or maybe just even that's probably the most simple. Or hold that bank, and you're going to come in long and have a tailwind, which neither are good. But you're not like in ideal conditions to begin with. So those were my my two thoughts. It was not this golf course up here. It was this or this. Let me zoom in on this. This is a really big yard. Yeah, there's a fence around it and some trees, but that's a lot of space, especially gear up for the plane to land. And then the other option, probably the riskier option, would have been to just held and may probably tighten that turn actually quite a bit to be able to make it back and get aligned with the runway or even anywhere on airport property. I don't know that I would have tried that. And we don't know their altitude then. We just know they turned apparently about 300 or 400 feet AGL. They may not have been that high. And, at the end of the day, too, it's hard for me to see making this. I don't know what the mileage is on this. If I were going to return to the runway, I think, even though I'm not turning into the wind, the more intuitive would have been holding that left and coming in long. It's hard for me to see. Let me zoom in just a bit. This track here, even though that probably puts me into the wind, that's a lot more distance at low altitude. So for me, yeah, I think this would have been my option. But at the end of the day, what I was going to say, I mean, you have probably 15,000 hours between these guys. They thought the safer option or the best option was to try to make it to the airport, and they almost did. Again, 15 feet, so say 25 feet just for a margin of error. A little bit more altitude, 25 feet, and they would have at least made, probably not the runway. They probably would have ended up on the runway. But they would have made this plateau with this service road, and the outcome would have been much different. And admittedly, that's looking at this through hindsight. So what can I learn from this? The KISS principle: keep it simple. Stupid. Don't try some this turn that's going to take perfect coordination and really managing that airspeed, and probably at a steep bank, more than I'm used to flying. If I'm already fading this way, and they're probably in a headwind already, so either the old adage would have been straight ahead or 60 degrees. This probably, depending on where they were, this probably would have been more than 60 degrees. And if I had the altitude to make it, that would have been, if I really thought I could pitch for best glide, keep the gear up, flaps up, and until maybe I got closer, and then go full flaps and try to set it down. This golf course, the only way that would have been in play would have been had they faded to the right, to the north. Then yeah, absolutely. But they didn't. They faded left, so I don't think the golf course was ever in play. Final thoughts on this. I really am. Devastated is probably a little bit strong, because I didn't know either one of these guys personally. But Francis was, to me, as a former Rusty pilot, as a low-time pilot, he was the face of aviation safety and the AOPA itself. I don't think I've watched all the ASI videos, but I've watched a lot of them. And, it really has impacted me. So, takeaways: the engine shows problems, kind of in order, then shut it down. Look for a reason not to go. And I'm actually going to follow that exactly in the flight I have planned today, later on. Not because of engine issues with the plane, but because of stabilator cable issues and an AD that was issued on this plane, and I've experienced some problems with it. So yeah, if it doesn't check out, I'm staying on the ground. But anyway, yeah, look for those red flags. Don't actively look for them. And it doesn't, even if it's you don't feel right about it, if something doesn't feel right, hang your hat on that, close the hangar door or tie it down or whatever, and live to fly another day. The And the human factors too, that's what I was going to mention. You can't, we're not machines, okay? And you can't, we're not ever going to operate that way. So yeah, the engine shut down, it started right back up, and presumably the run up was fine. I can absolutely see that. Now, I wouldn't have gotten that far, or at least I'd like to say that. Sitting here on my couch, and I'm not 300 or 400 feet off the ground in a struggling airplane. But there was also pressure with this to get this done. So the human factor. Then the decision to turn right and return back to the airport. Well, these guys thought that was the right call. And I don't fault them. It's really hard I think, for anybody to fault someone with a lot more experience. Did it turn out to be the absolute right choice? Well, maybe not. But then again, and maybe they saw this field and or this yard or whatever that is, and thought, no, we can't make that. But I would imagine if you thought you had the altitude to make the flight path they did with all the turns, then yeah, pitching for best glide and putting down somewhere here would have been an option. But back to the keep it simple, stupid. Stay with within your skill set. Now, having said that, both of these guys, yeah, I'm sure had no problem making steep banks and keeping not stalling the plane, and they didn't stall the plane. Could I have done that? Well, probably not. Which, keep it simple. That's probably what I'm shooting for right there. But I don't know. And I think the final and maybe the best and most important lesson, if it can happen to these guys with this amount of flight time and experience and training, and I mean, yeah, it can happen to any of us at any time. So again, looking for that reason not to go. But again, sorry to be so long. Love to open the conversation in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on such. I'll still be following this, and and some of these questions we'll never know. We may never know exactly where they were, or even within a half mile, or their exact altitude. But I'll be following this, and we'll be really curious to read the final report on this crash. Either way you look at it, I mean, a terrible loss. Thoughts go out to the families, friends. I feel the loss, and like I said, I didn't know either one of them personally. But yeah. Please remember, do the YouTube thing. And until next time, thanks, guys.